I never imagined the first crack in my world would come not from sickness or age, but from the woman who married into our family, the woman I once prayed would be a partner to my son and a mother to my grandchildren, yet instead became the person who tried to erase me when I was most vulnerable. And if you are listening to this, please take a second to subscribe, like, and leave a comment, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's the story of every grandmother who has ever been pushed aside, treated like she's disposable, and I want the world to hear it, to see how cruel family can be when greed and selfishness take over, and maybe together we can shine a light on these injustices. So here it goes. The night it all began, I was sitting alone in my living room, my old tabby cat curled at my feet, when the phone rang at 3:11 in the morning. And if you are my age, you know those calls in the dark hours rarely bring good news. My hands trembled as I reached for the receiver, my throat dry, and on the other end was a nurse from St. Mary's Hospital telling me my son Jacob had been admitted. They suspected a brain bleed and that I should come immediately. I remember grabbing the nearest coat over my nightgown, my hair sticking up in every direction, my slippers still on my feet, and rushing into the cold night with my car headlights cutting through the fog as tears blurred my vision, whispering to God over and over, "Please, not my boy, not my only boy." And by the time I arrived at the emergency wing, the halls smelled of antiseptic and fear. And a young doctor with kind eyes, but a voice too heavy for his years, led me into a side room where he told me the words no mother should ever hear. Massive hemorrhage, no chance to save him. I'm so sorry. My knees buckled, and I remember clawing at the wall as if I could rip time backward, as if sheer desperation could bring him back. But it couldn't. Nothing could. And in that endless fog of grief, I signed papers I couldn't see. I nodded when they asked about arrangements. I wandered in circles because my mind could not comprehend the reality that my boy, my Jacob, the one who called me every Sunday, the one who fixed my porch swing last summer, the one who told me, "Mom, don't worry, I've got you," was lying cold and still behind a door I couldn't open. And it wasn't until almost noon that my daughter-in-law Kelly finally arrived, hair perfectly styled, sunglasses perched on her nose though we were indoors, her nails glittering as she scrolled her phone. And all she said, without a hug, without a tear, was, "Traffic was awful, and I had to find someone to watch Hannah." Hannah being her daughter, my granddaughter, who I had already called the school for, already arranged to spend the day with her best friend's family because my first thought was protecting the child from the shock of losing her father. But Kelly, the mother, hadn't even thought to do it. And when I told her through choking sobs, "Jacob is gone," she gasped theatrically, her hand fluttering to her throat, her mouth forming a perfect O. But behind the mask I saw it, the flicker of something that was not grief, relief, calculation, something cold that twisted in my gut and told me I wasn't just mourning my son. I was about to be forced into a battle I didn't ask for. A battle for my granddaughter, for the legacy Jacob had left behind. And as the hours passed in that hospital, I watched Kelly pace the halls making hushed calls, slipping away whenever the nurses approached with questions about funeral arrangements, deferring everything to me with a casualness that was almost insulting, saying, "Him better, you decide." Like she was handing off an inconvenience instead of standing in the role of wife. And when Jacob's attorney, a family friend named Thomas, arrived later that evening with red-rimmed eyes, hugging me so tightly I thought I'd collapse, it was he who whispered that Jacob had made preparations, that there were things I would need to know soon. And I remember glancing at Kelly in that moment as she dabbed at her sunglasses with a tissue, dry-eyed, her attention snapping back to her phone where Richard, yes, even then I noticed his name flashing across the screen, was calling. And I felt my stomach churn because I knew, deep down, that my son had seen something coming. Something in his marriage, something in his wife. And he had tried to prepare, but in that moment, all I could do was clutch Jacob's childhood photo from my wallet, the one of him grinning with 2 missing front teeth, and whisper to myself, for Hannah, for Jacob, I must be strong. Because if you've ever buried a child, you know the grief doesn't end at the grave. It only changes shape. And I felt with every bone in my body that my grief was about to take on the shape of a war with my own daughter-in-law. a woman who should have been by my side, but instead was already calculating her next move. And I didn't know it then, but Jacob had left me a letter, words that would become my armor, telling me to watch her, to protect Hannah, to trust my instincts. And as I left that hospital alone, walking into the cool night air with my heart shattered into dust, I swore to myself that while death had taken my son, I would not let greed, lies, and manipulation take my granddaughter too, and that vow would become the only thing keeping me alive in the dark days ahead. When people ask me what hurts more, bearing my child or realizing that even before he died, he had already betrayed my trust, I can't always answer because the grief and the betrayal feel like twin knives lodged in my chest, and sometimes one cuts deeper, sometimes the other, and if you are still listening to my story, please subscribe, like, and leave your thoughts in the comments because I know I'm not the only mother who has ever looked at her own flesh and blood and wondered how he could turn away so easily from the woman who gave him life, the woman who sacrificed everything so he could stand tall in the world. And that truth, that a mother's devotion is not always met with a son's loyalty, is the wound that never really heals. Because before Jacob passed, before Kelly revealed herself for the cold, calculating widow she would become, there were nights when my phone would ring and it would be Jacob himself, his voice strained and hurried, telling me he couldn't come by to fix my leaky faucet or drive me to the pharmacy. Not because he was too busy with work as he claimed, but because Kelly didn't like him spending too much time with me. And instead of pushing back against her cruelty, instead of standing firm as the man I raised him to be, he would fold, he would apologize, he would whisper, "Mom, you know how she gets," as if I were supposed to understand that keeping the peace in his marriage was more important than keeping his promises to me, and it shredded me inside because I remembered every sacrifice I had made for him, the double shifts at the diner when he was a boy, the nights I sat up sewing patches into his jeans so he wouldn't be teased at school, the way I skipped my own meals so he could eat. And yet, as a grown man, he let his wife dictate when and how he could see his own mother, and I can still remember the Thanksgiving before he died. How I cooked a whole turkey with all the fixings, candied yams, green bean casserole, pumpkin pie, the smells filling my little house the way they had every year, and Jacob called an hour before dinner to say they weren't coming. That Kelly thought it would be better to spend the day at her parents', instead because her father had bought an expensive bottle of wine she didn't want to miss out on. And I hung up the phone and sat at the table alone with enough food for 12 people, and tears streaming down my face, my cat pawing at my lap as if to say I wasn't entirely alone, but I was, and the loneliness turned to bitterness, because I had raised Jacob better than that. I had raised him to honor family, to remember where he came from, and yet he chose again and again to turn his back on me whenever it made Kelly's life easier. And though I forgave him every time, telling myself he was caught in her web, the truth I couldn't deny was that he let it happen. He let me fade into the background of his life, and when the hospital called that night to tell me he was gone, along with the agony of loss came the unbearable regret that our last conversation had been nothing more than a quick, distracted check-in, him promising to stop by sometime next week to help me with my taxes, a visit that never came, words that now ring like a curse in my ears, and I think about how many chances he had to choose me, to defend me, to honor me, and how often he didn't. And I wonder if deep down he knew that his time was short, if that was why he changed his will, if that was why he left me that letter, telling me to protect Hannah. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was redemption. But whatever it was, it came too late to erase the sting of years of small betrayals, of holidays missed, of birthdays where he showed up empty-handed with excuses about being too busy while I always had a gift wrapped for him, no matter how broke I was. And I want you to know, anyone who hears my voice, that a mother's heart can endure 1,000 wounds from the outside. But when the knife comes from the inside, from the very child she carried in her womb, that wound bleeds forever. And sometimes I sit in Jacob's old room, the posters of his baseball heroes still on the walls, the trophy he won in 8th grade still on the shelf. And I cry until my body shakes, not just for the son I lost to death, but for the son I lost long before, the one who stopped choosing his mother when it mattered most. And I wonder if any of you out there have lived this, If your son or daughter once clung to you for everything and then grew up to act as if you were nothing, and if you have, please tell me in the comments so I know I am not alone in this. Because grief I can carry. I have no choice, but betrayal from your own child, that is the heaviest burden of all. If losing my son Jacob to death and realizing how often he had chosen others over me wasn't enough, life made sure to twist the knife by showing me that even my own daughter, the little girl I once braided hair for before school and rocked, to sleep when she had nightmares, would one day betray me too. And if you are still listening to my story, please subscribe, like, and comment, because I need other mothers and grandmothers to hear this and maybe share their stories so that I know I am not the only one who has lived through this kind of heartbreak. Because betrayal from a child is the kind of pain that doesn't just bruise the heart, it poisons every memory of the love you once gave. And my daughter's betrayal began quietly, in whispers and silences that grew into cold distance, and I should have seen it coming, but I didn't, because I kept telling myself she was busy, she was tired, she was just trying to build her career. But the truth revealed itself when I was at my lowest, sitting at my kitchen table with a pile of hospital bills from Jacob's passing, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of numbers that blurred through my tears, and my phone buzzed with a text from her. Not a call, not a visit, just a message that read, "Mom, I can't help you financially. I have my own family to think about. Please don't put pressure on me." And I dropped the phone onto the table as though it had burned me. Because never once had I asked her for money. Never once had I burdened her with my struggles. In fact, I had given to her every step of her life, paying for her college by cleaning motel rooms on weekends, co-signing her first car loan, letting her and her husband live rent-free in my basement when they were starting out, cooking every meal for her babies while she worked night shifts. And yet, here she was, not offering comfort or love, but making it clear that she saw me as a weight she didn't want on her back, and I wept right there at that table, not because of the bills, but because of the realization that my daughter, my precious Emily, had stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a burden. And the next time I called her just to hear her voice, to ask if she could come by for dinner so the house wouldn't feel so empty, she sighed so loud it pierced my heart and said, "Mom, I don't have time for guilt trips. We're busy. We're building our life. You need to learn to be independent." As though independence was new to me, as though decades of raising children alone after their father died, working 3 jobs, paying every bill, surviving every storm by myself wasn't independence. But now when my heart was breaking in pieces, she decided to tell me I was clingy, that I should learn to stand alone. And it was in that moment that I realized some children forget the hands that raised them the moment they no longer need. Holding, and I remember one Sunday afternoon, not long after Jacob's funeral, when Emily came over with her husband, dressed in designer clothes I knew she could never afford on their salaries, and as we sat in my living room, she looked around at my modest home, the framed photographs, the antique furniture, and she said in a tone that was meant to sound casual but carried an edge I couldn't ignore, "Mom, you really should consider selling this place and moving into a retirement condo. It's too much house for you, and besides, the market's good right now. You could give us a little help with a down payment for a bigger place." And my chest went cold because I saw it then, clear as day. This wasn't about my well-being. It wasn't about helping me. It was about what I had left that she could take, about squeezing whatever she could from me while dressing it up as concern. And when I told her softly, through tears threatening to spill, "This is my home. This is all I have left. I can't give it up, not now," her eyes hardened, and she said the cruelest thing I have ever heard come from her lips. "Maybe if you had taken better care of yourself, we wouldn't have to take care of you now." And the words cut so deep I felt the room spin. Because what child tells their grieving mother that her pain is her own fault? And I wanted to scream at her, to remind her of all the nights I stayed awake by her hospital bed when she was a sick child, of all the mornings I walked miles so she could have bus fare, of all the times I chose her needs over mine without a second thought. But I didn't. I couldn't, because all I could do was cry, silently, my face in my hands, as my daughter sat across from me with her arms crossed, her husband nodding along like he was entitled to my life too. And I knew in that moment that I had lost her, maybe not to death like Jacob, but to greed, to selfishness, to a world where parents are nothing more than stepping stones. And even now when I look at her photos, the ones I still keep on my dresser, I wonder if the little girl who once whispered, "I love you, Mommy," while clutching her teddy bear is still in there somewhere, or if she is gone forever, replaced by a woman who sees her mother not as family, but as property. And that question haunts me every night, the kind of question that makes tears soak my pillow until I fall asleep from exhaustion. Because the truth is, betrayal from a daughter doesn't just hurt, it makes you question your entire worth as a mother, as a woman, as a human being, and I am left wondering if my love was ever enough, or if from the very beginning she was destined to turn away, the moment I had nothing left to give. I thought betrayal from my own children was enough to break me, but the cruelty of my son-in-law showed me that sometimes the deepest cuts come not from the family you raise, but from the ones who marry into it and believe they have the right to erase you. And please, if you are still listening to my story, subscribe, like, and comment, because I want to know if anyone else has ever been humiliated in their own home by someone who should have shown them respect, because that's what happened to me one awful night that I can't erase from my memory, the night when Emily's husband Ryan sat at my dinner table with a smirk on his face and mocked me as though I were some useless, unwanted stray, and the worst part was that my own daughter let him. She sat there in silence, her eyes downcast, not once defending me, not once remembering all the sacrifices I made so she could sit at that very table without ever going hungry. And it happened. Like this, I had invited them over after Jacob's passing, because I thought maybe breaking bread together would remind us we were still a family, still bound together by love even if grief had made us raw and distant, and I cooked everything myself: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, even an apple. Pie, the kind Jacob always asked for on his birthdays, and when they arrived, Ryan walked into my kitchen without so much as a hello and looked around as if he owned the place, his eyes scanning the cabinets, the chipped countertops, and he sneered, "Emily's right. This house is falling apart. Maybe it's time you moved into a nursing home where someone can actually take care of you." And the words hit me like a slap across the face. My hands froze on the serving spoon, my chest tightened, but I forced a smile and said, "This house is old, but it's mine. Every corner is filled with memories of raising my children." And instead of softening, he laughed, a cruel laugh that made my skin crawl, and he said, "Memories don't pay the bills, sweetheart, and let's be honest, you're just another mouth to feed. Maybe Emily and I would actually get ahead if we weren't always worried about your problems." And my heart shattered, because I realized in that moment he didn't just see me as useless, he saw me as a burden. And worse, he had convinced my daughter to see me that way too. And when I looked at Emily for help, for some flicker of defense, she just stared down at her plate, fiddling with her fork, and the silence screamed louder than any insult, and I felt the tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back, because I refused to give that cruel man the satisfaction of seeing me crumble at my own table. So I served the meal, my hands trembling, and tried to keep the conversation light, though every word from his mouth was another knife, him bragging about his new job, him boasting about the vacation they had booked while I still struggled to cover Jacob's funeral expenses, him mocking how I cut coupons and shop sales while they dined at steakhouses, and finally, when I excused myself to the kitchen to catch my breath, I heard him mutter just loud enough for me to hear, "Pathetic, living off scraps and pity. I don't know why we keep coming back here." And I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from sobbing because my heart was splitting open. And yet when I walked back into the room, I carried the pie with a smile plastered on my face. Because what else could I do? This was my daughter's husband, the man she had chosen. And I didn't want to push her further away by lashing out. But inside I was screaming at myself for letting him into my home, screaming at God for letting me live long enough to be treated this way, screaming at Emily for letting her husband spit on the very woman who gave her life. And after they left that night, after they drove away in the car I once helped them buy, I collapsed in the living room with the lights off, the empty plates still on the table, and I wept until my body shook so violently I thought my heart would give out. And even now I can hear his voice, mocking, cruel, as if I am nothing, as if 67 years of surviving, of fighting, of working, of raising children mean nothing. And I want to ask you listening right now, has anyone ever made you feel small in your own home, like a guest in the very place where you built your life? Because that's what Ryan did to me, and no matter how many nights pass, no matter how many prayers I whisper, the sting of that humiliation never leaves me because it wasn't just his betrayal. It was my daughter's silence, and together they carved a hole in my heart that will never be filled. I thought maybe after burying my son, after holding his child's hand at the graveside, and whispering promises that I would always protect her, life would give me a moment of peace. But peace is not something you get when your daughter-in-law sees tragedy not as loss, but as opportunity. And if you are still here with me listening to this broken voice of a grandmother, please subscribe, like, and comment. Because I need to know if anyone else has ever had an in-law who looked you straight in the face while pretending to grieve, all the while plotting how to take the last pieces of your life away, because that's what Kelly did. She wasted no time, not even a month after Jacob's funeral, before she showed up at my door in her high heels and silk blouse, her hair perfect, her perfume choking the air, carrying a stack of papers in her manicured hands, and she said, without even stepping inside to sit with me, "We need to get the house transferred over, Eleanor. It's what Jacob would have wanted. You have your own place. You don't need this big family home. It's meant for Hannah and me." And I felt my body tremble as I clutched the frame of the doorway, because I remembered Jacob's letter, the one he left me, telling me she would try this, telling me not to trust her. And in that moment, his voice rang in my ears like a bell, warning me. And though my throat burned with rage and grief, I managed to say softly, "I can't make decisions like this right now, Kelly. My son isn't even cold in the ground." And she rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at me as though my grief were an inconvenience, and she leaned in close, her perfume mixing with the bile rising in my throat, and she hissed, "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Eleanor. Sign the papers, keep your little pension, let me raise Hannah in the lifestyle she deserves, and you can still come visit on holidays." And the tears flooded down my cheeks right there, hot and heavy, because it wasn't just the cruelty of her words. It was the way she spoke about my granddaughter as if she were an accessory, something to be used in her bargaining. And I said through sobs, "Kelly, this isn't about money. This is about family. This is about love." And she smirked, that cold smirk that will haunt me until my last breath. And she said, "Love doesn't pay the mortgage, Eleanor. Jacob understood that. Why don't you?" And in that moment, I realized she didn't just want my son's memory. She didn't just want my granddaughter's trust. She wanted everything. My home, my security, the very ground beneath my feet. And she was willing to rip it away from me while I was still bleeding from loss. And when I refused to sign, she stormed out, her heels clacking on my porch like a warning, shouting over her shoulder, "You'll regret this, Eleanor. Don't think I won't fight you for what's mine." And I collapsed onto the floor, my body racked with sobs so violent I thought my chest would break. And I cried out loud to God, asking why. Why, after raising children alone, after surviving the death of my husband, after giving every ounce of myself to my family, I was left to battle a viper like this woman. And I swear in that moment, as I lay there gasping, I felt Jacob's presence like a whisper in the room, reminding me of his words in that letter. "Document everything, Mom. Protect Hannah. Trust your instincts." And I dragged myself up, wiped my tears, and pulled out a notebook, writing down every word she had said, every threat, every cruel twist of her lips, because if I was going to survive this, if I was going to keep my granddaughter safe from a woman who saw her only as a pawn, I had to fight smart, not just with my heart, but with evidence, with strategy, with the strength my son believed I still had. And though my tears still stained the pages of that notebook, I filled them night after night. Because if my daughter-in-law thought I was just a weak, grieving old woman, she was about to learn that even broken hearts can sharpen into weapons when there is a child's future on the line. The day the letter from my son's lawyer arrived, tucked inside a plain envelope with my name written in Jacob's handwriting, was the day I finally understood just how dangerous my daughter-in-law truly was. Because until then, I thought, maybe She was just selfish, cold, blinded by greed. But what I discovered was that she had been plotting for much longer than I realized. And if you are still listening to me, please subscribe, like, and comment. Because I need you to know that what I'm telling you is not just a story, it's a warning for every mother and grandmother out there who thinks they could never lose. Everything at the hands of someone who married into their family, because when I opened that letter and read Jacob's words telling me he had updated his will 3 months before his death, specifically to protect me and his daughter from Kelly, I felt both my heart breaking and my spine hardening at the same time. Breaking because my son had carried this secret burden of a failing marriage, hardening because he trusted me to finish a battle he had started. And in that letter he wrote, "Mom, I know she'll try to manipulate you, but don't let her win. Protect Hannah, trust Thomas with the evidence, and don't reveal everything you know until the right moment." And I clutched those words to my chest as tears soaked the page because even in death my son was still guiding me. But as the days unfolded, Kelly proved just how right he had been, showing up at my door with lawyers, with fake kindness, with crocodile tears, and each time she leaned against my doorframe with her expensive purse hanging off her arm, she would say things like, "Eleanor, don't you want Hannah to grow up in comfort? Don't you think Jacob would have wanted me to provide stability? Isn't it cruel to drag this out?" And the way she twisted words, the way she tried to make me feel guilty for not handing her the home Jacob had entrusted to me, it was like watching a snake uncoil. And there were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, sobbing into my pillow, terrified that she would actually succeed, that she would take Hannah away to some new city or state where I would never see her again. And I thought about all the times Jacob had brought Hannah to me quietly, saying, "Mom, she's happier here, she needs you." And I realized he must have seen this storm coming, and I knew I could not collapse. Not now. Not when his little girl's future was dangling between love and neglect. So I began writing everything down. Every visit, every word, every lie, because Jacob told me to document and I trusted him. And when Kelly started hinting about moving Hannah to Miami, about fresh starts and new schools, I smiled through my tears and told her I understood, all the while calling Thomas late at night, whispering like a spy in my own home, and the guilt tore at me because I wanted to confront her. I wanted to scream in her face that I knew about her lies, her affair, her betrayal, but I had to play the long game. I had to pretend to be weak so she would underestimate me. And do you know how hard it is, at 68 years old, grieving your son, raising your granddaughter, to pretend to be smaller than you are, to act as though you don't see what's happening right in front of you? It is torture. It is like cutting yourself open with a dull knife every single day. And yet I did it. I smiled when she insulted me. I nodded when she talked about selling the house. I even thanked her when she implied I should move into a retirement facility because Jacob told me to wait, to watch, to gather proof. And though my tears never seemed to dry, though my heart felt like it was breaking 1,000 times over, I began to find a strange strength in my sorrow, a determination that whispered, "She will not win." And as I tucked Hannah into bed at night, brushing her hair back from her tear-streaked face, whispering stories about her daddy, I made another vow, this one louder than the first. I promised her out loud, "Your daddy loved you more than life itself, and as long as I have breath, I will not let anyone take away the love and stability he wanted for you." And though she drifted to sleep, clutching her stuffed bear, I sat awake by her side, tears spilling silently, because I knew the war was just beginning, and that woman, the one who should have been my ally, was sharpening her knives while I clung to the last of my strength, praying God would give me enough time, enough courage to see this fight through. The morning I walked into that courthouse, clutching Jacob's letter in my purse and Hannah's little hand in mine, I felt like my knees would give out from the weight of it all, the grief, the fear, the humiliation, and if you are still listening, please subscribe, like, and comment. Because I need to know if anyone out there has ever had to stand in a room full of strangers and fight for the right to protect the only piece of your heart you have left. Because that was me. A 68-year-old woman with swollen eyes from nights of crying, standing across the aisle from my daughter-in-law, who looked more like she was walking a runway than attending a custody hearing. Her lawyer polished and sharp, her voice dripping with fake sorrow as she told the judge that I was too old, too fragile, too emotionally unstable to care for a child, and I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, because I wanted to scream, to tell them all that this woman cared more about money than her own daughter, that she was already planning to sell the family home and ship Hannah off to Miami like excess luggage, but instead, I stood still, clutching the notebook I had filled with every cruel word, every manipulation, every lie. And when the judge asked me to speak, my voice cracked like glass breaking, my tears pouring down my cheeks as I said, "Your Honor, I may be old, I may be grieving, but I am not weak, I am not blind, and I am not here for myself. I am here because my son Jacob trusted me with his daughter's future, because he knew what his wife was capable of, because he wrote me this letter warning me, and because this little girl deserves love, not to be used as a bargaining chip in a war for money." And the room fell silent except for my sobs, and I could see Kelly's face twist, a flash of rage, breaking through her perfect mask, and that gave me the courage to keep going, pulling out the pages of my notebook one by one, reading aloud the dates and words she had spoken, the threats she had made on my porch, the conversations where she dismissed my grief, and the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and for the first time in months, I felt the tide shift. I felt Jacob's presence in that room, standing behind me like a shield. And when Kelly's lawyer tried to paint me as delusional, Thomas stood up, presenting the financial records we had gathered, the proof of her secret accounts, her hidden spending, the evidence of her affair, and the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Struck by a stick, reporters whispering, people craning their necks. And I wept harder, because it wasn't just about exposing her lies. It was about finally having someone believe me, finally being seen. And when Kelly slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "She's lying! She's making this up to steal my daughter from me!" the judge raised his hand for silence, his voice stern as he said, "Enough." And the silence that followed was like thunder rolling in the distance, because everyone in that room could feel it. The truth was no longer hidden, the mask had slipped, and the woman who had spent years trying to erase me, to diminish me, to strip me of my dignity, was unraveling in front of us all, and I stood there shaking, my tears still wet on my face. But for the first time in a long time, those tears were not just of sorrow, they were of release, of defiance, of the hope that maybe, just maybe, justice was finally within reach, though I knew in my heart this was not the end, that Kelly would not surrender easily, that she would come at me again, sharper, meaner, more desperate. And as we left the courthouse that day, Hannah clutching my arm, whispering, "Grandma, did we win?" I bent down, kissed her forehead, and through fresh tears I whispered back, "Not yet, baby, but we're closer than ever, and I promise you, we will." The night after the court hearing, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, the same room where I had once held my babies, the same room where Jacob had played with Hannah on the floor, while cartoons flickered on the old television. And I stared at the family photographs lining the mantel, my tears dripping onto my lap as I whispered to the empty house, "How did it come to this, Lord? How did love turn into war?" And if you are still listening, please subscribe, like, and comment, because I need to know if anyone out there has ever felt like they were fighting their own family just to breathe, because that's what this feels like drowning in betrayal, while pretending to be strong for the child watching your every move. And though the judge didn't make a final decision yet, though the lawyer said the case could drag on for months, I could feel the battle lines hardening. I could see in Kelly's eyes as she stormed out of the courthouse that she wasn't finished, that she would rather burn everything to the ground than admit defeat, and that knowledge weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. But at the same time, as I tucked Hannah into bed that night, her small hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt, whispering, "Don't let them take me away, Grandma," I felt something ignite inside me, something stronger than fear, stronger than grief, stronger even than the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. And I bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I won't, baby, no matter what it costs me." And as I sat beside her bed, listening to her breathing slow, Watching her chest rise and fall, my tears dripping silently into my hands, I realized this war wasn't just about property or money or even dignity anymore. It was about the soul of my family, about proving that love could outlast lies, that sacrifice could still mean something, that even when your own children abandon you, you can still choose to fight for what's right. And yet, as the clock ticked past midnight, as the shadows stretched across the walls, I felt the dread creep back in. The dread of knowing that Kelly had resources, that she had charm, that she had the ability to twist people's minds the way she twisted my daughter's, the way she twisted Jacob until he couldn't breathe. And I thought of the things she might try next, the lies she might spin, the people she might convince to stand against me. And my heart trembled with the terrifying thought, what if she won? What if despite all my tears, all my prayers, all my evidence, she still managed to rip Hannah from my arms and erase me from her life? And I sat there in the dark, clutching Jacob's letter to my chest like a shield, rocking myself back and forth as though I were the child now, sobbing silently so Hannah wouldn't wake, whispering, "Don't let her take her. Don't let her take her," over and over like a desperate prayer. And though I try to tell myself that truth always wins, that love always finds a way, deep down I know life is not always that kind. And so I am left here, suspended between hope and despair, between love and betrayal, between the promise I made my son and the fear of breaking it. And I don't know. How this story ends, not yet, but I know one thing with absolute certainty. The fight isn't over. And as long as I can still breathe, as long as my heart still beats in this old, battered body, I will not stop. Not until the last tear falls, not until the last word is spoken in court, not until the last lie is exposed. And maybe one day, when this is all over, I will sit here again with Hannah by my side, her laughter filling the house like sunlight, and I will tell her the whole story, every betrayal, every tear, every battle, and she will know that her grandmother never gave up, not even when everyone else did, but until that day comes, until the final gavel falls. I remain here in the shadows, crying, waiting, praying, and asking myself the question that haunts me every night. Will love be enough to save us, or will betrayal win in the end?